Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Lately I have been reading Dragon Carving and the Literary Mind, or The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons, depending on how you translate it. Literary Mind carves dragons would probably be a good bet, and I'd like to I intend to read a full chapter of this if I get there, but I want to give ample preamble before that. But I'll read a little bit from chapter 12, Morning Song and Epitaph. Inscriptions and morning songs appear in the virtuous Zhao dynasty. A court official must be able to compose morning songs on funeral occasions. A morning song enumerates. It numbers the virtues of the dead to immortalize them. Little is known about this type of writing before the Xia and Shang dynasties and so forth. So that was from chapter 12. This book has been broaching the topic of epitaphs, elegies, eulogies. I'm just throwing some English words at you. And I think that I have done a video somewhere about my original entry into the world of poetry, which was, well, I can't say for sure because my memory is all jumbled from early childhood, but I am going to guess that this may actually antedate the 11-year-old's experience in his 6th grade class, wherein we were assigned to write a poem. I've talked about that in my video about my relationship with the muse, so I won't go into that here. And I think I may have talked about the books that I found at the public library, so I don't know which came first, but the books may well have preceded that. And the library, the children's section of the library was in the basement, or it was sort of a half basement of the library. Then there was a first floor and a second floor. At least that's how I recollect it. The building which housed the library had formerly been a mansion, and it has been restored to how it formerly was, which meant removing all of the library that I knew, which in a way is too bad because I have a lot of memories from the building. So there was a little back staircase that led up to the adult section from the kiddies section. And when I discovered that, I started going up, I would say surreptitiously, but nobody was really paying attention to what anybody was doing back in those days. And there I discovered books of epitaphs. There were at least 3 different books that I found that were nothing but compilations of epitaphs. One of the books I liked much better than the other 2. I would bet that if I went to my local library, my local branch, I could not find a single one. But tastes have changed. I don't even know how I would begin to look for those old books. I bet the library at the town that I grew up in would not even have those anymore. So this is a long meandering getting into. I was tagged to do a tag video some while ago by Pat at Book Chat with Pat, and it was something like the BookTube watching tag. And one of the prompts was, what kind of videos do you like to watch, and what kind of videos do you like to make? And the kind that I like to watch are the kind that are pretty succinct and to the point. Brian at Bookish is a good example. He has a topic, he comes on and presents his points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's all well thought out, it's concise. And in my case, I do the opposite. Now, I have mulled over some things perhaps, and then I come on and then I just meander all over the place at length, never really making much of a sense out of the jumbled incoherence. Okay, well, I've got that out of the way. Some weeks ago, maybe a month ago by now, another booktuber read a poem by J.V. Cunningham. I believe he's something of an academic poet. There's a couple of poems in here that I have up on my site somewhere. I could put a link to them in the description box, along with other things. But this booktuber said that one thing to know about J.V. Cunningham was that he was born without a sense of humor. He had no sense of humor. I would dispute that. And for my first exhibit, I will read the second poem in this book. In fact, I believe that the other booktuber read a poem by Cunningham, which is number 1 in this book, on Dr. Drink. But number 2 is the one I'm going for. Here lies my wife, eternal peace be to us both with her decease. So, there it is, number 2. Here lies my wife, eternal peace be to us both with her decease. So that's kind of funny, I guess. It's an attempt. So it's not the writing of somebody who is totally devoid of a sense of humor, or at least wit, I guess, even though it's not very witty. It was the best he could do. Let's put it that way. And this poem struck me very much because it is, in the first part, identical, and then in the second part, very similar to a poem that I learned when I was young, that I pulled out from one of those epitaph books. So his was Here Lies My Wife. Mine contains the exact same words. And then eternal peace be to us both with her decease. And the one that I learned from that book is slightly different in words. The overall meaning is very similar. And the wit behind it is superior to JV's. So his again goes, here lies my wife, eternal peace be to us both with her decease. And the one I learned was, here lies my wife, here let her lie, now she's at rest, and so am I. Now, I don't know if J.V. Cunningham had seen that same poem that I did and thought he could improve upon it. If he did, he failed in the task. But I suspect that this may well have been just his own invention. Here lies my wife, eternal peace be to us both with her decease. And recently, actually, I came across a third poem. It really surprised me, a third poem that takes exactly the same tack as those two. And I'm guessing that it was in this book, but I don't know, I cannot find it. It also was not very good, or not nearly as good as the poem that I first read as a boy. So I didn't make a marking for it or anything like that. So again, I'll give you the poem that I first came across when I was a child. Here lies my wife, here let her lie. Now she's at rest, and so am I. I'll give you a couple of others that I still remember from back then. Here lies the body of John Round. He was lost at sea and never found. Another one, which is slightly longer, is a poem that served me well, having, without any effort, memorized it, because later on, some years later, in 7th or 8th grade, my teacher assigned us to memorize a poem to recite to the class. This was not part of a big lesson or anything. It was just some kind of ad hoc extra credit type thing, maybe. I don't remember. But fortunately, I had the epitaph for Joseph Jones in my mind, and I will give you that one. Here lie the bones of Joseph Jones, who ate whilst he was able. But once o'erfed, he dropped down dead and fell beneath the table. When from the tomb to meet his doom, he rises amidst sinners, since he must dwell in heaven or hell. Take him which gives best dinners. So I think you can see how all three of those poems appealed to the juvenile that I was. Nevertheless, they were good enough to be in this book. That one by J.V. Cunningham would not have been. But there was another poem, a fourth poem, which I recognized as superior to all of those, and it consists of 3 couplets. And I remembered the first and I remembered the last, but the middle one I could not remember. Fortunately, I took the precaution of writing down all these epitaphs and putting them in a safe place. I have a notebook. Maybe one day I will bring that out. But I also used it in my book, The Soul's Refinement, which has come up recently. I mentioned how I did use a lot of quoted matter, and essentially that was quoted prose excerpts from an array of sources. But there was one poem that I used, and it was the epitaph of which I speak. So let me give this to you. What, is he dead? Doth she survive? No, both are dead, and both alive. She lives, he's dead, by love through grieving, in him for her, yet dead, yet living. Both dead and living, then what is gone? One half of both, not anyone. And I think I recognized then and still recognize the superiority of those lines as poetry. I've often wondered why it never made it into an anthology such as the Norton Anthology. Really marvelous lines that have stuck with me. As I say, I remember the first and the third couplet, but not the central one. In the course of my writing of poetry, I have learned about the art, one of the central purposes of poetry is to be a vehicle for the retention of memory. And one of those original types of memories which people sought to hold on to was the memory of dead loved ones, dead important personages, and so forth. And in my own writing, for decades now, I have always exercised that facet of the art when the occasion arose. So I will link these as well. Up here at the site, at YouTube, I have elegies that I've written for Daniel Pearl, for my former teacher, Paul Carroll, for Anthony Huber, a young man who was murdered in Kenosha, and then for Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, more recently murdered by the, I guess they're called Israeli Defense Forces. If my big box of manuscripts survives and somebody gets a hold of it and decides to sift through all of those papers, somebody could pull out all of the poems which are elegies and make a book of them. It's just something that I have done as time has gone on when the occasion arose. Not to mention the poems upon the death of a pet or a friend's pet, that kind of thing, which I have tried to write in such a way as to make them more generally applicable. This aspect of poetry, the use of verse for elegy, is seldom talked about in academia. But that is one of the primary functions of poetry. And so, coming across a couple of sections in here which discuss that, I have felt almost a homecoming. Now, I should say, 8 years ago, I read a good deal of this edition, and I have come to realize that this edition is not so good. It is translated by Vincent Yu-chung Shih, and the translation is not as well done as the one by Yang Guobin. So Yang Guobin, right there, I think. I am not going to especially recommend this edition unless you need the Chinese. There's the original and then a paraphrase. But I do recommend the translator. And I would like to read one whole chapter, the chapter that follows the one which I just showed you. Excuse me. So, chapter 13, Lament and Condolence. In ancient funeral rites, a person who dies young is to be lamented. The word lament is related to cling. Grief clings to the heart, hence lament. A lament expresses sorrow for the early death of the young. It is not used for elderly, gray-haired people. Once, 3 worthy young men were buried alive in the tomb of Duke Mu of Qin. Although 100 lives were offered as ransom for those 3, they all died prematurely. The poem Yellow Birds in the Book of Poetry mourns their death. This is a lament. When Emperor Wu of Han made sacrifices to heaven and earth on Mount Tai, his young attendant, Huo Shan, died of a sudden illness. Deeply grieved, the emperor composed a poem in his memory. This is also a lament. A change in the form of the lament was initiated in the later Han dynasty, when Kui Yuan wrote a lament for the Prince of Ruyang, a grown-up. However, the phrase about the dead entering the gate of the ghosts is bizarre and senseless. The sentence about the dead riding a dragon over clouds is fanciful and not sorrowful. Its final verse, written in 5-character lines in the style of a folk song, is modeled on Emperor Wu's lament over Huo. Su Shan and Zhang Sheng both wrote laments. They used dazzling language that did not fully express the feelings of the heart. In the Jian'an period, only Shu Gan wrote good laments. His Lamentation for a daughter expresses genuine sorrow. Modeling his writing on Shu Gan's, Pan Yue brought this genre to perfection. His thoughts are fertile and language varied. His feelings are deep and his grief intense. His narrative resembles biographical writing, and his style follows that of the book of poetry. His short 4-character lines are untarnished by sluggishness. As a result, his works are elevated in thought and gracious in diction, ancient in form, yet new in feeling. His laments on his daughter Jinlu and on a friend's daughter Zhe Lan are unequaled. The characteristics of a lament are as follows. Its main purpose is to express sorrowful feelings. Its language is redolent of regret and loss. Because the subject died young and was unable to fulfill his potential, it praises only the promise of his bright intelligence. As the dead was too young to assume a public role, the loss of his physical form is mourned, not his official presence. A lament written from sadness is sincere. A forced lament is ostentatious. The ostentatious style uses ornate language without creating a sorrowful effect. A worthy lament is one where the feeling goes out to embrace sorrow, and the language induces the reader's tears. The character for condolence is related to arrive, as a line goes in the book of poetry, "Spirits have arrived." The mourning ceremony for a virtuous man who has lived out his natural term is elaborate and solemn. When guests come to condole with the bereaved, they are said to have arrived. Condolences are inappropriate to deaths resulting from such invited risks as drowning, but may be given when lives are claimed by natural disasters. Thus, when the state of Song was flooded and the state of Zheng hit by a fire, envoys arrived from other states to express sympathy and concern. A peculiar use of condolences occurred when, after congratulating the state of Jin on completing the Siqi Palace and the state of Qi on attacking Yan, the respective authors Shi Zhao and Su Qin immediately presented condolences. They did so because they considered that building a palace or invading another state at the expense of the people would only lead a country to its downfall. Condolences are also appropriate in the following situations. Death is the consequence of pride, of narrow-minded discontent, of unfulfilled ambitions, or of fine but flawed talents. Here they are used to commemorate the dead. As a literary genre, the first condolence was written when Jia Yi, crossing the Xiang River in dejection, called to mind the suicide of Chu Quan. Its form is perfect and its facts precise. Its language is fresh and feeling sorrowful. When Sima Xiangru condoled with the second emperor of Qin, he composed in the style of rhyme prose. Huan Tan commended Sima's work because grief was transmitted to the reader. Its brief, clear ending leaves behind an acute sense of sorrow. Yang Xiong's condolence for Chu Yuan was a work of enormous labor but little merit. As he set his mind on contradicting Chu Yuan, his argument was rather strained. Ban Biao and Kai Yong were good at manipulating words, but worked in the shadow of Jia Yi, whom they could not rival. The condolences written by Hu Guang and Ran Yu on the death of Bo Yi and Shu Qi give only praises, while Wang Kan's condolences on the same figures make skillful criticisms. Hu and Ruan praised the integrity of the dead, while Wang lamented their narrow-mindedness. This is because they had different views. Mi Heng's condolence for Zhang Heng sacrificed clarity to elaboration and ornament. Lu Ji's condolence for Emperor Wu of Wei had an artful preface, but a long-winded text. Thereafter, no other works are worth mentioning. The condolence is an ancient genre, but ornamentation was a late development. When excessive ornaments are used and the numbers are slow, a condolence becomes a piece of rhyme prose. Righteous thoughts are essential to a condolence. It reflects virtues, warns against errors, and gives praise or censure with caution. If it is sorrowful but not indulgent, it will not depart from the right path. Summary. A lament is written for those who die young. Since ancient times, people have lamented the budding flower that is cut off. On this theme, even the best writers may hesitate and get lost completely. Sad feelings to move all future generations can only be conveyed in the form of a condolence. So my Chinese is not good enough to know the differences in these words, and I have no literary experience to speak of that would allow me to recognize the forms of which they speak. Even in English, however, one might point out that the differences between, say, elegy and eulogy are not clear-cut, although something that I saw suggested that nobody really mistakes them. And indeed, I mentioned 4 of my own elegies that I will link to in the description box. They have not always been labeled as such. The one for Anthony Huber, for example, when I first posted it, I did not call it that, but then I reposted it a second time and I put the word elegy in the title just to make it more clear. So I think that covers just about everything that I wanted to talk about. I think poets shy away from writing elegies or poems for the dead, but there have been a good number of well-known ones. Just going through the poems that I have read written by other authors with a search of the word elegy, you find quite a number of them. I think I even have something from this book in there. This is a translation by Seamus Heaney, I think is his name, a writer whose translations I have always preferred to his own poetry. So I will let the matter rest. Thank you very much for rest in peace. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.